episode 187. How do I become a positive person?
You're listening to the very best podcast in the world on health, wealth, and happiness. Please remember to leave a review and share with all your friends and family. And here is your host, Lars Hilser.
And it's Tuesday, kids. Welcome to the very best podcast in the world, your only source in the universe for personal supremacy through health, wealth, and happiness. Now, beside today's episode being a true test for the pop filter on the microphone, I chose this based on recommendations, really, more than anything else. I got inquiries. People were like, hey, why are there quite a number of episodes about negativity, but you don't outline the positive, or you don't specifically mention it? And I said, well, that's easy. Just basically reframe the whole thing. And despite the fact that you may think that this is going to be like a second washout of all the negativity episodes, it's not. So with that being said, all the negativity, this episode, as always, and we're getting to the housekeeping section, is based on my own personal views. And if you don't agree with them, that's okay. It's not the fucking end of the world. That's why, everybody has opinions and they're like assholes because everybody's gonna, I fucked that up. Sorry about that. So, if this episode or any one of the others doesn't necessarily resonate with you directly, maybe there are people around you that you can, say, hey, that person may need a little bit of positive input, then share this episode with them and do your general favor to humanity and share this podcast in general through your social media, and dedicatedly share an episode that you think is insanely valuable, or has been, if you have already listened to it. In that case, that being said, housekeeping over, let's move on to how do I become a positive person? And first off, and justifiably so, a lot of you are going to say, I'm happy where I am. Why should I become, a more positive person in the first place? What's this about? And there is a multitude. There is a multitude of impacts that you can have on your surrounding by becoming more positive, right? You can be known for being that grouch. I don't know. If you're cool with that, perfect. That's all right. However, if you feel like, hey, I don't want to be that person, then you have to go on the opposite side of the spectrum, which is going to be an insanely positive person, for people to remember you for what you are, and not be somewhere in the middle of the spectrum where you're just going to be this kind of neutral individual that, you're there, but you're not. And that's what this, gaining positive, or adding more and more and more positivity to your life, has a positive effect on your surroundings. Justifiably, you're probably saying, what the fuck do I care about the people around me? I'm an egoist. Maybe some of you are, don't know. And being a positive person has positive impacts on yourself, Okay, now that I got all the egoists, and all the high ego riders at attention also, let's get started. How do you become a positive person? So, number one, and probably the most important thing, is that you need to be aware when you are negative at the present moment. Now, what does that mean? A lot of us have negative thoughts. We have negative expressions, and we'll get into detail on all of these things in a while. We kind of see the negative before we see the positive in a situation. And you don't really have to dig that far to draw something positive out of any situation that happens to you in life. However, and this is important, this is where we get back to the awareness. Being aware of the present moment is key to understanding, number one, your surroundings, things influencing you, things maybe triggering you to stir up these negative thoughts and emotions. But more importantly so, it's about being able and in a position, and that's about the awareness, of countering these triggers or influences or whatever it is at the end of the day, or actively manipulating, actively reframing a situation to see the positive. Does that make sense? So an example, I always think of negative situations which should be conceived as negative when I attend an annual conference in Riga in Latvia. It's in October. And it's pretty far east and pretty far north. So the weather is like really shitty. Like before, it turns to snow. It's, this icky, almost, but not really freezing, cold, damp weather. Pretty much every fucking year. And so while walking the, few hundred meters or yards from the hotel to the event venue, you come across a lot of people, and a lot of them are really fucking looking like they're depressed, and they're about to, go into a room or, on the street, pull out a gun and snuff themselves, right? They look so depressed. Most of them. Some of them you come across have a smile on your face. And I get those people who are depressed in those situations, right? You come outside, and the weather is shitty. It's cold. It's uncomfortable. It's wet. It's moist. It's basically totally disgusting. So whatever your reason is, it's got to be a very good one, right? What used to be work, now is home office in a lot of places. But what used to be work, now is grocery shopping, is, going out, meeting with friends. And you come into this basically hostile environment, right? Because it just doesn't feel right. So how in the fucking hell are you gonna positively manipulate and reframe this negative, this hostile environment into something positive, right? And that's a jiffy. That's a very difficult one. Now, for me, obviously, it was the conference, right? It was like meeting interesting people, having fun, sitting, around with people, talking shit, and just being in the moment in this, grand building with these clever people, and talking to them, lecturing them, giving my speech, getting hyped about that. And that was for me really the motivating part, where I walked around with a smile. That's how I reframed it for me. Now, keep in mind, I was there for 2 days or 3 days, and then I was out again. Not that the weather in northern Germany is a lot better, but at least you're home. That adds to the negativity in a certain sense. So I don't know how all of these people stayed positive. No fucking clue, right? But how they, a lot of them, again, I thought they would just, pull out the gun, put it to their head, and off themselves. And that's where, feeling the moisture, feeling the cold, feeling the damp, gets dark very early, obviously that time of year. And you're like, okay, how do I get positivity out of this? And for me, like I said, it was clear. Would I live there longer? How would I react? No idea. I honestly couldn't tell you. But even as much as walking these few hundred meters to the venue is like, you see this river, you see the boats, you see, this totally different architecture, right? From, in context to where you lived and grew up. You see totally interesting people, and a lot of them are just like, despite all odds, against all odds, they're smiling and they're like, they're motivated and they're, keeping it going. And those positive people are kind of like what got me thinking about this episode in the first place. So now that we got that covered. So it's about the awareness. It's about the present moment. It's about the reframing. So despite the hostile environment, I was able to reframe for myself that this was, overall a good situation, because I only had 200 meters to go. Across the street, I would be at the venue. Walked by my favorite pizza place in the fucking world. Anybody needs the address, the very best podcast in the world at gmail.com. Hands down, best pizza on the planet, honestly. So, and that's what, I meant with the awareness, that you have to be aware why you should be feeling shitty, or why you are feeling shitty, hostile environment. And then reframe it to something positive, where you say, okay, I only got to tolerate this for 200 meters because then I'm going to be at the venue meeting interesting people, yada, 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 right? And that is, just one example, pars pro toto, for everything that you go through, right? Okay, now that we got that covered, if the awareness that you then achieve at a certain moment, at a certain point in time, tells you why you're feeling negative, or whatever, so you can avoid the triggers. That's the bonus, right? So if you know that, if you are aware that, you're basically your shitty mood is triggered by a coworker or a boss, just avoid that motherfucker, at all costs. You're going to have to be together with them one time or the other, but you can go out of people's way pretty easily, right? But you have to be aware, and you have to isolate the trigger or the negative influence on you in order to be able to then actively cut that trigger down. And that's what the awareness is really most important for. So, when you're not aware, you're in a negative mindset, you'll likely slide down a spiral. That's, if you don't pay attention to your mindset, it's very easy to take that home, for instance, from the office, or to take your shitty situation at home to other places. And if you're not made aware of it regularly, that you're being a jerk or, a bitch, then you have no way to reflect upon that. So, even if you're in a leadership position, pay very close attention to how your subordinates react to you, right? Are they fearful of you, and have you encouraged them to communicate openly with you that you're, slipping or whatever? Because, it goes downhill very quickly. So let's stick with the situation that you've got a shitty boss that you have to tolerate for, the years to come, right? And you're going to be on edge, right? Because it's a situation which doesn't end. Otherwise, the workplace is great. You like it. It's, along with your career goals, yada, yada, yada. But then comes this asshole motherfucker that kind of ruins everything, right? Because their persona is just so annoying, right? That it dampens you down, and creates this bad mood in yourself. So then you've got a bad mood. Then you go home, right? Your spouse is the victim of that, right? Then you start criticizing them, and getting on their nerves because they're getting on your nerves, presumably because your nerves, meanwhile, are paper thin, right? Because your boss is wearing and tearing you down. Then you take this whole fucking mood one step further from your private life towards your kids. You're annoyed about them screaming, yelling, having fun, things you would otherwise really enjoy and should enjoy. And you start criticizing them and you start to get on their nerves and you detach from them. And then, you take this into your hobbies and, it just turns into this cycle of frustration, of this downward spiral that you very, very, very quickly have to jump off, right? And this is, for instance, even emphasized by vocabulary, right? Let's take a stupid example there. It's like you come into a room and it doesn't smell very pleasant. What do you say? It stinks, right? Or it smells like gore, rotten, whatever. While, truth of the matter is that, I don't know, there's a spoiled potato in the cupboard somewhere, right? It's a pungent stench and whatever. How about saying it doesn't smell good? It doesn't smell that good, right? Sounds totally different from using extreme vocabulary, right? I'm the right person to say that. Using so many bad words in this podcast, but it's meant in a funny way. And I would never go and say, hey, you stink to a person, maybe, right? There's kind of like a little bit of more de-escalation involved in telling someone, or, should be, than telling them in their face that they stink or that they don't smell good, particularly people that you love, right? It's very interesting how the effect on someone you love is when you tell them that they stink, for whatever reason, right? And I saw that I read this in the blog post the other day where, it was like this. It was like about this relationship. And it was totally weird to me. But anyhow, long story short, rephrasing, and watching the words that you use can have a totally different impact on your thinking, on your mindset, on the influence on the present moment. Right? So imagine you come into the kitchen and there is a rotten potato in the cabinet and, you say to yourself, God, it stinks in here. Or you say, doesn't smell that good. Let's investigate where the source is. It's like destructive versus constructive. Constructive? I think so. Anyhow, long story short, it's really interesting how vocabulary can also influence positively or negatively the present moment. So when you are aware that you have, and this goes back to the example I just mentioned. So when you're aware you have a negative thought, don't strengthen it through vocabulary. That's, I think, another very important addition to make here. So going back, how do I become a positive person? Well, awareness of the present moment in full effect. All senses totally alert, right? And picking up every micron of energy that's surrounding you. Every smell, every scent, every color, every ray of light that's there. Pick it all up. And then from this heightened awareness, influence your thinking positively. Choose positive vocabulary. If it is a negative situation, reframe it into a positive one. Not making the journey the goal, but the goal the actual goal. Like with the example of walking through this hostile environment. And I think then, and that's what I do to stay positive and become even more positive, is to emphasize in my mind the positive aspects of any situation that happens to me. And in that sense, I think we'll wrap it up for today. And I hope you have a good rest of your Tuesday. If you've already had your Tuesday, then have a good night, and we'll be in touch tomorrow. Bye, folks.